I'm Tom Conway from Palo Alto Networks. I'd like to thank you for our endpoint discussion we're going to have today. Please grab a seat. It's like church. All the open seats are in the front. So what we're going to do today is very similar to some of the other panels. The panel is going to talk for about half of our time, and then we're going to go back to a roundtable session as well. And I've got two guests, one government and one technical subject matter expert to talk about endpoint. What are some of the challenges of the current generation endpoint, and what some of our government and CIKR customers are looking for to go after some of the new challenges. And really what's happening in endpoints, what's happening all of security, I call it the 3 Vs. You got two intersections of 3 V lines, volume, velocity, and a variety of both threats. And then in terms of endpoints, you have increased volume, velocity, and variety of types of endpoints, whether you're talking VDI, whether you're talking mobile, whether you're talking IoT or ICS SCADA. So you have two very steep trend lines that are accelerating. And how are you as an organization that's got limited manpower funds and frankly management's attention and end users' patience for a lot of agents on their boxes, how are you supposed to deal with this? So before we get into some of the prepared questions I have, I'd like to ask each of my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their organization and their role within the organization.
All right, my name is Darrell Peek. I'm with DHS, Office of Chief Technology Officer. Many of you just heard from my boss, Mike Hermes. I directly support Mike Hermes on a number of activities within DHS. In the CTO's office, we have enterprise architecture. We also have our digital innovation and solutions area, as well as our strategic technology management. So we are responsible for reporting not only to the Hill, but also GAO, OIG, and others about some of the activity that's going on across the enterprise. I come from NPPD, where National Protection and Programs Directorate, Office of Cybersecurity and Communications, Federal Network Resilience. That's a mouthful, but essentially John Schroefer brought me over from State Department to support the CDM program in its earlier stages. So I supported that for a number of years. I also represented the agency on the network defense capabilities. And on top of that, I was a cybersecurity strategist, which helped out with some of the strategy within CS&C and NPPD as a whole. Currently in my role, I am across the board helping out with digital transformation efforts, as well as involved heavily in the cybersecurity discussion, especially in the areas of acquisition. So that's it.
I don't know if I can top that, but so I'm Josh Morris. I work for Palo Alto. I'm a director of our cybersecurity services. So what's that mean? It's basically our emerging products within Palo Alto, outside of our core firewall and other products that we have out there. So been in cybersecurity for some time. Before Palo Alto, I was at a company called BAE, and before that, a small cybersecurity company called Symantec. But I'll leave it at that.
Great. Well, thank you both. I've neglected to tell you my background. I've been doing federal IT my entire career. Started in the government many, many moons ago in the Pentagon. And since then, I've worked for both systems integrator and independent software vendors. I worked for McAfee. I worked for FireEye. I've worked for Northrop Grumman. So I've seen a lot over my many, many years and many, many hairs. So I'm going to jump into the question. And Darryl, you're in the hot seat, so you get the first one. So the current generation of endpoint security solutions, what are some of the shortcomings you're seeing within them?
Well, I will say that it's hard to look at it at scale, right? One of the challenges that we are seeing is that we have so many endpoints, and it's hard for us to do an effective job at looking at asset management, not only on the hardware side, but also on the software side. So being able to understand what the importance of the endpoint is to the infrastructure, as well as keeping track of the things that are on that particular endpoint, that is one of the challenges. In earlier stages of CDM, when we tried to understand what are some of the vulnerability management and configuration management, we had to understand what the assets were. And actually, out of the program, we indicated or observed that we were off by about, well, some agencies were off by up to 300%. Wow. So you have a certain cost element that comes into play when we talk about cybersecurity. I guess the fly wants to be part of the conversation as well.
That's our next.
That's our fourth.
It's a big fly too.
So that is one of the challenges, and also it's just kind of saying how many agents do we put on an endpoint in order to properly secure it, and what does that impact on as far as our productivity? So are we still getting the same level of productivity based on the same level of security that we are receiving? And also, it's just no 100% solution, just to make sure we're reasonable in our expectation of endpoint security. If an aspirational goal is to say, well, we want no malware to ever end up on an endpoint. Well, that's unachievable. That's like you don't want an accident on 7 o'clock on DC traffic. So it just happens, but we want to make sure that we are mindful in remediating as fast as possible. So I think that is kind of the challenge, but also some of the opportunity.
How were you able to maintain the balance between compliance, which a lot of programs are focused on, versus, I guess, detection, versus prevention is what we're all striving for? Is the old generation of technology skewed in one way or another?
Well, I would say that Jeanette mentioned Einstein earlier, right? So when we talk about the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative based on the Presidential Directive 54, that helped us first look at NetFlow, looked at what's going in and out of our network. So it's looking at it from the perimeter base, but when you get down to the endpoint, what are some of the security measures that we're going to put in place in regards to data loss prevention and antivirus and other elements? Also, based on the conversation that we had earlier, was about artificial intelligence and how does that play a role as an embedded agent on the endpoint to make sure that our devices, right? So we'll be at 2020 by this fly is just like really hanging out. Well, at 2020, we're estimated to be at 50 billion devices. So how can we manage 50 billion devices with a limited workforce, with a limited budget and limited expectation or greater expectations? So I think that is kind of the discussion that we need to have or continue to have, is saying that how are some of the behavioral aspects going to play a role in how we manage the endpoint within our networks.
The endpoint's an interesting spot in the network. The network's very important. When you think of the endpoint, it's your last line of defense in one way. It's also your first line of defense because that's where the user interfaces. So can you talk a little bit about how that all flows together?
And I think that's an important point, because if you think about the endpoint with no data, with just a bunch of hardware, it's not really useful, right? The real value of an endpoint is the data that it maintains, or the data that it has, or the access that it gives you. So being able to understand the importance of the endpoint because of the data has you a different conversation. So when we talk about the architecture of our particular networks, and we talk about going towards more virtualization than the traditional just having all the software on one device, there is some opportunity to change the strategy. So when we think about it strategically, what is going to be our strategy? So as we talk about moving to the cloud, as we talk about hyperconvergence, as we talk about reducing our overall footprint or perimeter, that's going to be part of that element too. And I would say that based on some of the legislation that came out, specifically how FISMA is being reported. So I don't know if many of you seen the FISMA annual report for 2016. It just came out a few weeks ago, but it does talk about some of the things that we are monitoring as far as PIV compliance, as far as malware, as far as ISCM, and doing the continuous monitoring aspects of our network. So I'm kind of flipping between the actual endpoint, which is a part of it, but really it's giving you access to the entire infrastructure, which is our biggest concern.
Okay, great. Let's shift over to you, Joshua. Can you talk about some of the things industry is developing to help people like Darryl deal with some of these new challenges he's seeing at the endpoint, as well as integrating into the larger ecosystem of the network?
Yeah, well, so a lot of it, and there's been a lot of sessions today and people talking about it, but the connection with AI, right? Connection with threat intelligence clouds, right? The more data in the cloud, the smarter the endpoint's going to be and how it communicates back and forth. But one of the key things, and it comes from our founder, Nir Zook, it says, if we can detect something wrong, why don't we prevent it, right? So if software can detect it, we might as well prevent it, right? So why detect it and then have the limited resources that we have in our firms, right? That we don't have a lot of people that are knowledgeable or even up to speed on cybersecurity. The resources aren't there, right? Every article talks about it. But now we're giving tools in our company that then makes them do more work. And maybe it's a goose chase. Because something happens, it was said, hey, this is bad, go take a look at it. Well, that endpoint's supposed to be doing that. That server's supposed to be doing that. That SCADA device is supposed to be doing that. So I think that's one of the things, is preventing the malware and the exploits coming in, as opposed to just detecting on them and then remediating, right? Just prevent from the beginning, and that's kind of one of the name of this session, right, is prevention. So prevention's key.
How about going a little bit, prevention is one leg of the stool, things like integration and automation, can you go into a little bit on that, Joshua, how that's starting to come to fray forward and to help into the fight?
Yeah, so part of it is the prevention tool, but the integration automation, but we're talking about agents being on endpoints and the CPU usage, right? We want to have them be lightweight, as well as it's not just an agent, but how many processes are running in that agent, right? So you may have an agent, but it's running, as we've seen, some of our competitors and other agents out there running between 24 and 30 processes, but it's one agent, right? So it's that CPU power on that. So reducing that on the integration. And whenever you talk, I can't put another agent on my device, right? We can't handle it. So we usually have the conversation and discussing with the institutions about how we can take them from having maybe 24 agents down to 6, and how we can help on the CPU processing power. Then it allows them to integrate and have their current devices do more.
And agencies, and Darrell hinted at this as well, are going virtual and they're going cloud. How can that approach move with that move?
Well, it's all staying with the times, right? And staying with the technology. And as we're, and it's moving to the cloud, and people talked about the light bulb, right, before. I think it was Dean. But talked about the light bulb, talked about the refrigerator and elliptical. But having these devices that can turn into listening devices, right? All of our, or I shouldn't say all, but majority of our TVs in our homes are made in probably foreign countries, right? And those easily can be turned into listening devices, right? And even viewing devices, some of them have cameras on them today. So the endpoint's continuing to emerge.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to Darrell on this question. As I mentioned, the volume, variety, and velocity of endpoints in general are huge. You think about DHS, you walk through an airport, you go through TSA, they've got sensors there. You've got the Coast Guard, you got the Border Patrol and people like that. So you're probably starting to see a lot of that. What are some of the common challenges that would work across all those different variety endpoints? And what are some of the unique challenges you're seeing?
Well, I would say from the operations perspective, we want to make sure that we have the right devices in the right hands, right? So even if it comes to mobile devices that help with recording, and being able to ingest that information and maintain it. I will say that from a system side, though, that our system managers are looking more towards flexibility, right, of the endpoint, of being able to utilize the cloud and be able to utilize certain assets in order to automate aspects of the cybersecurity challenge. So for us, we're looking more at the network and saying, well, how can we really have ongoing authorization be a reality, but also how do we make sure that those endpoints are detected by having products on there, by making sure that they're not necessarily lightweight, but they're more secure than if we had the traditional or legacy infrastructure or software on them. So one of the discussions that we are having is in our technology roadmap, as far as how do we do the refreshes of some of the legacy devices that we have. So we have old Dell computers, we're utilizing old chips and old infrastructure that is no longer supported. How do we modernize with the times while making sure that we are increasing our posture from a cybersecurity perspective? So that is a discussion that's going on with our CISO's office as well as our RMD office to make sure that we are accounting for those proper products and tools based on the CDM program.
So Joshua, I use multiple devices like everybody in the room. You've got your mobile, you've got your tablet, you've got your work system, whatever that is. You're logging in from kiosks. What can policy do to follow the user as opposed to making user try to follow the policy, right? How do we automate that so the policy becomes transparent to the user?
Oof, that's a great question. So I think part of it is working with the organizations, right? It's not just cybersecurity, right, folks? It's working with other pieces in the organization, right? So it's your technology folks, your HR folks, your legal folks, and working through it. But as these technologies are merged, you know, I'm a big advocate of zero trust, right? So I think that's that piece. But then also there's actually the reality, right, of working with your organization and your people in a zero trust environment, right? So you look at the president, right? He walks down the street, zero trust, right, with everyone around him. But then trying to take that and implement it into the workforce isn't easy at all.
So what do you see, Darrell? Let's put our future hat on. Look, it's 5 years in the future from a technology standpoint. Looking back, what has changed between now and then that you can?
Well, I know that there are a couple of emerging technologies that are being looked at. Mike mentioned the software-defined infrastructure and looking at things from just being a totally virtualized environment. The other one is picking up a lot of steam that we are starting to look more into is the artificial intelligence, as we discussed earlier, as well as blockchain and the potential for blockchain within, or the business relevance of blockchain within our networks. The other interesting aspect is, and it's really early, and I'm starting to get more understanding, is quantum cryptography. And how does that now translate into the way we do business? Because computing power is getting so advanced that we have to continue, as Josh mentioned, keeping up with the times. So as far as that is concerned, I think artificial intelligence, some of the blockchain discussion that we're talking about, as well as the, I just lost my thought because I lost my sound. But
I can hear you.
As well as looking at quantum cryptography as the potential for the future of cryptography going forward. Because as we talk about it, as computing power gets stronger, it actually reduces the amount of time for the adversary to get access or to break certain cryptography approaches.
And so Josh, you think in 5 years' time, give me your opinion. Will we still call it endpoint security? Will endpoint security be a feature of a much larger network security or enterprise security platform?
I think it's going to be, so there's common terms like defense in depth, right? One of my friends calls it expense in depth, right? More in people spending lots and lots of money, lots of different technologies, right? And they're doing it, maybe investing in MDM, but they may not need MDM, but they're doing it because they got to tell someone they have it, right? So I think it's going to be part of it, right? I think endpoint security has been around for a long time. And I don't see it going away, right? As more devices, and who knows, we may not have endpoints anymore. It's gonna be little chips in our brain that are looking through sunglasses or glasses or something. I don't know, but I think it's gonna be around for a long time, and we got to continue to evolve with it. And one thing you mentioned is evolve and also still protect legacy assets, right? So it's the XP machines, the other legacy Windows devices with WannaCry came out, right? And everyone's like running around crazy trying to make sure that everything's patched, right? And up to date in patching, which we all know, even a patch comes out, it typically takes 30 days or longer, depending on the organization. Everyone says they're patched, but it takes time to get that done. So there's always going to be gaps that you need security, and it's key.
Right. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that the audience was aware of course, 1.1 of the cybersecurity framework is coming out. So being able to look at, identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover for your infrastructure as you build out your strategy for cybersecurity and embed that into your overall IT strategy. The other one is the National Institute of Cybersecurity Education is starting to define the roles in regards to your environments. As far as what roles do you need to address certain functions, and that's both on the NIST website, but it has been done in conjunction with DHS. So I just want to make sure that the information is at your disposal. As we start to dissect the cybersecurity EO, we want to make sure that everyone is aware of where that comes from, as well as referencing PPD 41 to understand the roles of our agencies in respect to incident response.
Okay, we got 5 minutes before we break out to the roundtables. I want to ask each of you the same question, and I'll let you start first, Josh. What are the one or two things that government or critical infrastructure organizations should be doing on the endpoint that they largely aren't? And then when you're done, I'd like you, Darryl, to take a crack at the same question.
Okay.
Well, one of the key things, and I said it a couple times just to Joe, is prevention first, right? I think is just preventing it, not having malware, not having it on the devices is key, right? Especially for legacy systems, and you're talking about SCADA systems and everything else that usually have older operating systems. Right. So as you said, two things?
Yeah, one or two.
Yeah. So I would say prevention first, and also I would say a multi-method approach, right? So those would be the two.
Okay, Darryl?
Right. Though a very old model, the OSI model is still one that we look at. And when you think about layer 6 and 7, when you think about the presentation and the session layers, we want to reduce the amount of malware that is executed per that phishing attack. Right? Still, one of the greatest vectors to our endpoints is people getting access and clicking on links. And we want to make sure we can reduce that by having strong antivirus software on our computers or on our endpoints, but also being able to limit the amount of success that an adversary may have within our networks. Overall, for the industrial control systems community, just as far as the cyber hygiene, we are still having communications with that community in order to make sure that our critical infrastructure sectors are doing some of the best practices in regards to cybersecurity protections, but it is still something that is evolving, especially through our information sharing and analysis centers. That's something that's really important to us. So we want to make sure that we take care of our ICS, our industrial control systems and SCADA systems, as well as our cybersecurity infrastructure, our IT and OT.
Okay. I know we have Admiral Rogers coming in at Heart at 3 o'clock, and it'll take us time to reassemble the tables. I like to throw an audible here and ask for audience questions. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand, ask the question, who you want to address the question, and also identify yourself, which organization you represent. Yes, in the back.
Garcia, quick question. Prevention or knowledge? Because I think a lot of people don't even know what endpoints they have, so how can you prevent it, do protection without knowledge? And the other question is, are there such things as endpoints now or waypoints? Because does anything really end, right? Because everything's connected to everything, so there's no end of the chain anymore. It's the person, and the person's now connected to something else. So really the question is, before you could follow that food chain down and have definite endpoints. I think now it's changing to a world that it's really waypoints, and it's sometimes circular and back and forth. And so how do you defend against that? Because now it's there's no kill chain anymore, where there's kill chains in that whole process.
So you want me? I'll take that since I
Sure.
keep saying prevention. So I think prevention and knowledge go hand in hand, right? Obviously, and you talked about it in your session, right? Knowledgeable end users, right, and educating them on what to do and what not to do is going to help 80% of the time or whatnot. So I agree, and it depends on which way you look. I'm an avid boater, so I love the term waypoint, but hopefully we can end it as well with the prevention, right? So it won't be a waypoint if an exploit's coming through delivering the malware, that we end it at that device, right? No matter where it is, so it doesn't pass through. And continue to go throughout the network and go east-west or wherever else. Because like you said, they're not necessarily looking to access my PC, right? Because they just think I'm, a dumb endpoint guy. What they want to do is they want to access the crown jewels of Palo Alto and get in there and see the servers and make through the way that the access that I have, right? So it's not necessarily, it's a means to get where they want to go, and it's their multi-pronged approach of what they're trying to do. So if we can stop them at the endpoint or the waypoint, I think that's powerful.
Well, and going back to, and you brought up with one of my earlier points, is that asset management is critical because it has a cost tail to it, right? One of the things I think about is acquisitions, and how in my acquisitions I'm doing certain estimation based on information that I have. So that gap that I see, whether it's 100% or even 10%, can be a significant cost that I may not be accounting for, which, if I can't pay for it, creates certain vulnerability in my infrastructure. So being able to have situational awareness is critical. In regards to protection, I believe that is the start, right? So being able to look at intrusion detection and then actual prevention is kind of where we are trying to go as a federal government, and it has always been part of the narrative that we're looking to explore. But it's a very difficult nut to crack, especially us working with our commercial service providers. We believe that they have a lot of great capability, but there's still more to do as far as the metrics, helping them making sure that our leaders know how to make that decision, and in regards to also our incident response through US CERT.
I believe security is like a balance sheet. It's got its debits and its credits, right and left. Knowledge is your debits. You got to know what's in your enterprise. But then you got to look outside yourself and look at the threats. And those two things need to be kept in some sort of balance, just like a balance sheet. If you overinvest in one, you're not in a very good place. And if you're overinvested in the other side, you're just in a different place.
Right.
So.
Well, and that actually goes back to our earlier discussion about whether we should do AI or whether AI is the answer, where we're looking at behaviors of the endpoint, or is the signature-based approach still effective for our endpoint? So that is for antivirus software. So that is a conversation that is continuing to evolve, and I'm very interested, as I said, to see the future in which we see kind of that head-to-head continue to go forward, and how will we look at it from an enterprise perspective, because in most cases I see AI happening in pockets.
Mm-hmm. Great question. One in the back right there as well.
I'm an anomaly. I am oh man.
He doesn't like microphones.
So anomaly is that I'm a counterintelligence, retiring counterintelligence guy who actually loves technology. So they shouldn't fix what they do. So my question is, I'm hearing a lot of, or my comment is, I'm hearing a lot of reference to prevention. With the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, I'm wondering what distinctions, or what is out there that distinguishes protection or prevention from termination? So something is actually in, terminate, characterize, and socialize.
Yeah, why don't you, Josh, go about how exploit detection is different, detection is different than other approaches.
Yeah, and I'll quickly use an example of exploit and malware. So for the military folks, exploits like the missile, and the malware is the warhead, right? So all malware has to have a delivery mechanism to make it through. And Keith here, who's much smarter than I, can go in deeper after about it. But that piece, right? So something has to have an exploit, and then also understanding within an organization is understanding what that endpoint or waypoint, what is it supposed to do, right? If it's a SCADA system, what is that supposed to be doing? And there's usually unique things that's supposed to be doing. If it's doing anything else, something's going on, right? And same thing is as with AI and user behavior that's coming with technology at the endpoint is what does this user do, right? Now this user is doing something else. It could be even accessing systems. If all of a sudden now I'm trying to access our threat intelligence cloud and start to play with it, Palo Alto's going to know, hey, something's going on with Josh's machine, right? So that's the prevention piece, right? So now let's say it's in there, right? It came through another way and maybe not an endpoint, someone plugged in or into that machine hardwired in, right? And now it's going on, right? So the same thing, you want to terminate it, quarantine it, right? And then clean it. So sometimes it's going to make it through, right? WannaCry, right? Everyone keeps talking about it. We noticed WannaCry all the way back in February 14th, right? So we've been seeing it for some time, but there was a big push on it. Why? Because of the press, right? Press came up and told everyone. Everyone became more aware. People were all of a sudden patching systems, working late. People were, buying more security solutions. But some people were already infected, right? So you got to terminate it, clean it, and then quarantine it. Is my thought. But I want to stop so you can talk.
Yeah, and as far as Cybersecurity Act 2015, there definitely was a lot of focus on the prevention elements. But the idea is spot on with what Josh said, is in regards to termination of assets is kind of a discussion and incident response. Once we identify what that is, we definitely want to understand what is happening within our network. So if there is a situation where someone does or a payload does get deployed on a certain asset, we want to remediate that as quickly as possible. But if we can deter it in the outset, that's where we're really trying to focus on, is saying, well, how do we catch this? What is some of the anomalous behavior that is taking place on this asset? And what are the remediations that need to take place without the human element being involved?
And take the rocket analogy further is, there's a kill chain methodology. Think North Korea, you got something on a launch pad. That's probably the optimal place to hit it, but there's risks involved doing it there for a lot of reasons. Then you have the boost phase. That's where you get it at the exploit. You're shooting at a missile. You don't know what's riding on top. If you're trying to catch it at the end when the malware, the bomb's about ready to hit Washington, a little too late at that point in time. You really optimally want to get it at the exploit phase. You want to shoot the missile down. You won't have to shoot a warhead down. It's a lot easier to shoot a missile down than a warhead.
Yeah. Or have it deploy in a sandbox, whatever.
Well, and one interesting piece of literature that I would recommend taking a look at is our mobile study that we just did with S&T and PPD, as well as other areas of DHS, where we talk about where are some of the concerns in regards to mobile. We believe that that's still a space that has not been fully codified. And that we still have a lot of work to do in regards to protecting that particular endpoint. Because from that asset perspective, just as powerful as a laptop or a computer, but we don't necessarily have the necessary controls in order to make sure that it's always safe within our networks, especially if you think about some of the BYOD approaches that folks are trying to use in accessing a corporate network.
So this side of the room is asking really good questions. You guys awake over here? Any questions over here? Come on, okay, we'll go back here then.
There's more people over here.
Dave Harris, Department of the Interior. So there was a mention of quantum computing.
Correct.
And so I'm thinking of hostile nation states developing quantum technology to defeat our asymmetric encryption. So on one hand, we could just keep cruising along and wait for the phone to ring and say, hey, asymmetric's been hacked, deal with it. Or is there anything proactively that we can start doing now in case that event occurs so that we're just not just starting from scratch?
Well, and the discussion around quantum cryptography is something that is really early. And I think that what we do now is start investing in certain proof of concept activities, which are addressing specific use cases for environments. As far as, I don't know of any companies that are doing it, and if you are a company in here that is doing it, very interested in talking with you. However, there is going to be a point where it's going to be machine to machine. We cannot, as humans in the process, we cannot defend against some of this technology that is currently out there.
But you're already seeing about 70–80% of your network traffic is encrypted.
Right.
From a security standpoint, you need to be able to break that open and inspect the payload before passing it on. So whether you're current or you're going to crypto, that capability is going to be vital going forward.
Absolutely.
Questions? All right, I shamed them into a question.
About the Palo Alto solution, does it monitor itself? Like, if the Palo Alto program starts throwing behavioral anomalies, will it prevent itself?
So my answer is yes. But on a technical side, I don't know, Keith, you want to be my phone a friend? And,
That's what you mean as far as traps, the endpoint solution?
or the threat intelligence cloud? Yeah.
The cloud will protect itself if it's doing malicious. The endpoint relies on sending it to the cloud for analysis, which is independent itself. So while it can do local analysis and do other things locally, it still leverages the cloud, so it's kind of double check.
Validates.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, that updates like firewall.
Yeah, and you think about cloud security, there's really 3 variants of that. You're protecting the cloud itself, you're protecting data and applications in the cloud, then you're leveraging the cloud to reach back into your enterprise and protect you. So when people say cloud security, they need to really break it down into one of those 3 elements because they're all interrelated but also fundamentally different at the same time. So how are we doing on time? 4 minutes. All right, want to do a 1 minute each? Parting thoughts?
Okay. Cybersecurity remains a very hot topic within the federal government. I will say that when we talk about IT modernization and what that means, there's a marriage that is taking place, right? Where our IT networks have to be modernized in order to support some of the modern technology approaches that we're trying to do as far as DevOps is concerned, as far as ongoing authorization and automation of our networks, but as well as how that cybersecurity element pays the picture. So how do we embed versus bolt on cybersecurity? As far as the legislation, one of the things that I talk to a lot of our vendors about is to help me understand what your interpretation of these requirements are. Because of course we always have our interpretation of what a cyber EO or what 1722 means or what any other piece of legislation means, but it's always good to see how your capabilities align with those specific requirements so that we can have a viable solution and we can explore and go further from our acquisition approach as well as modify the requirements that we currently put into our acquisitions. So that's one element. The second element is to continue to be creative and bring those creative solutions to us. We're working heavily with the venture community right now on some of those forward-leaning approaches, but I know that there are some of the true proven leaders that are also doing IRADs that are very important and very applicable. So our CTO's office is very understanding of that and really wants to have that conversation with you. So with that being said, that is primarily my part.
All right, thank you, Josh. Last word?
Yeah, so well, one is thanks for everyone for sitting here and listening to us chat for the last half hour or so. But the parting thoughts, the same thing is using tech, and everyone says cybersecurity, cyber risk, but using technology to help your organization, right? Mm-hmm. Not using the technology to put unforeseen burden on your employees, right? And that's sometimes when I said that, and I got a giggle out of the room, but expense and depth, sometimes that happens, right? And putting the proper solutions that are going to benefit your organization, not just because the person sitting next to you has it, but that's key. And I know it seems kind of common, but that sometimes doesn't happen in reality. And then prevention first, right, is a key thing, and I think that can help us a long way with a lot of the security partners that we work with. But again, thank you.
Right, and please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause for their time today. Great, and shameless plug, there's some technical information on your tables about how Palo Alto Networks can help you with some of these challenges, so feel free to grab one or grab one of us for Q&A. That guy's a walking billboard. Yeah. He gets all the hard questions.
Yeah, and feel free, we're all on LinkedIn, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks.